Welcome to Boiler Wild. My name is Eric Johnson, and on this podcast, I talk about boiler industry topics as well as personal development. WILD is a acronym I came up with for the podcast title name while I was out rucking at night. That's when I think the best. WILD is an acronym, and it stands for work hard, invest in yourself, lead others, and develop yourself into a person of excellence. I'm a big believer that we as humans can always get better in every area of our life. And we do that through tiny little progress every single day. We don't take one giant swing a year. It's tiny little things that we can do every day to get better. And that's in your career, you can read a book or a news article for 30 minutes a day. 30 minutes a day doesn't sound like a whole lot. But then when you compound that over an entire year, all of a sudden you've read 10 books and covered a bunch of news articles, and it's easy to not feel like you're learning. But then when you look back a year or a long time period, you can kind of reflect and say like, oh yeah, like I have learned something. That's what I do. Like reading, right now I'm reading a couple different books, but when I read books, I only read business books or like nonfiction books or boiler industry related books, and I just don't have any interest in fiction or like pleasure reading. It's all about, I enjoy reading books about business and getting better and trying to figure out how to train the next workforce. There is hundreds of books out there about human psychology and how people learn and how to motivate people and how much leadership goes into helping people learn. Like it's more than we just need to put on a couple of training classes and then everybody will be trained up, or we just need an LMS. This is a topic for another podcast, but I will touch on it briefly. If you think an LMS, which if you're unfamiliar with it, a LMS is a learning management system, and it's essentially a software that puts all your company resources in a linear path or an organized fashion so that you can train your employees or educate your employees. A learning management system without like professional learning courses is more like a digital library. So think of a library of books, and if you were to buy every single book that related to what your company does that could help people and put it in a library and then tell your employees, hey, we have all these books, I would almost guarantee you that you would find out that the A players that are hungry and driven would go find the books and read the books, and that everybody else that is not the A driven player may look at a book, may say they want to read a book, they may take a book, but then you ask them about it 3 months later and they say, oh man, I've been busy, I haven't gotten time to open it up yet. That's how a learning management system goes. Just because you give somebody a login doesn't mean they're going to log in. It takes way more. and you need to go into leadership and how you structure compensation and all kinds of different things. That'll be a different podcast. That's not what I want to talk about today, but I was thinking about that today from another conversation I had today. And it's just, I mean, I see it every day online of this college is bad, blue collar is good, AI isn't taking blue collar jobs. You can make $100,000 a year working the trades. Join the trades. It's easy. Why doesn't everybody do it? And there's multiple reasons why the world is the way it is and why people aren't just flocking to blue collar. And it's more than, oh, they just didn't know about the opportunities and how they can make $100K a year. It's way more than that, but it's, what does say somebody does do that. All right, an 18-year-old gets out of high school and then they start at a boiler service company. What do you do now? Like, everybody wants to talk about, we need to bring in the young people, but now, what do you do now? And statistics would say that the blue collar industries can't retain people as well. Something like 20 to 30% of people leave the trades after 1 to 2 years. And if we can't figure out how to retain people, then you're never going to be able to attract enough people to fill the labor gaps of the workforce. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why blue collar companies are struggling for people, and it's basically self-inflicted. It is not generational. A lot of companies will say, oh, these young people don't want to work. Young people have changed what motivates them. I'm motivated different than, I'm a millennial, and I'm motivated different than generations before me are. But employers who only think one way and say it has to be this way or it has to be the way I learned, that's not going to attract the next generation. And you're also not competing with your competitor down the street and all the companies in your area that are in your industry. You're competing with all the companies in the industry that post online, that are visible online anywhere in the United States. You're also competing with all the other employers in your area or people posting online. Unless the person has a bunch of experience in an industry and wants to stay in an industry, you're competing with every single employer. So when you say we will start you out at $20 an hour and you have to travel and be away from home for, a week every month, and you have to drive, 2 hours to a job site or something like that, and then you have to learn on your own time, and it's going to be hot and sweaty and dirty. And you have to buy your own uniforms because we don't supply uniforms. And then you have Amazon saying, oh yeah, we'll give you $25 an hour to work in an air-conditioned warehouse. Like, it's a pretty simple math equation to young people who are living in a very expensive world. It is very expensive to live these days. And while you may offer a career, if your entry-level position doesn't pay the bills, well, the entry-level person is not going to start there because they can't live. You can promise them all they want, but if they don't have the ability to pay their bills, then it is what it is. But anyways, that was a rant. I will talk about that in a more structured format in another podcast, but I just see a lot of that, especially on LinkedIn. I feel like it's an echo chamber a lot of times. People don't have an original thought. Maybe I don't even have an original thought. I try to think originally. But what I really wanted to talk about today is another tragic incident. And this is the pressure vessel explosion at the Loy Lange Box Company. I don't know if it's Loy Lange. It's Lange. I'm just going to say Lang. So if I'm mispronouncing that, sue me. But pressure vessel explosion at the Loy Lange Box Company in St. Louis. This happened in April of 2017. I think this is the most recent boiler related incident that caused death. That's the most known. The vessel that exploded wasn't a boiler, but it was connected to a steam system. It was connected to Clayton steam generators, which are technically it's not like a traditional boiler. It's like a one pass steam generator. It's a little different. If you've only ever worked on boilers, you will be mildly confused if you have to work on a Clayton steam generator. But anyways, the pressure vessel was a SCR, which stands for a semi-closed receiver, which, I'll be honest, before reading this report, I never even heard of a SCR. And I don't know if they're calling it something fancy, but it just sounds like a high-pressure DA. So the SCR had a MAWP of 150 PSI and would hold water at 300 PSI. It just sounds like a high-pressure DA. I haven't had the chance to investigate if there's a difference between a semi-closed receiver versus a deaerator, which is a DA. But the semi-closed receiver held water that was then supplied to the boiler, and the semi-closed receiver would receive high-pressure condensate and then also makeup water from a makeup tank. So it sounds like a deaerator, but I could be wrong. But the semi-closed receiver fed the two Clayton steam generators. And the semi-closed receiver was vertical. It was a vertical tank. So think of like a normal deaerator tank. It's on its side with the dished heads in the horizontal position. This is going to be in the vertical position. So the dished heads, you got a curved bottom and a curved top on the tank. And the tank was pretty tall, but the design of the tank allowed water to always be in the bottom of the tank unless the blowdown valve was opened. And over the course of time, the bottom of the tank had oxygen pitting and corroded and started to leak. And that's when the boiler operator noticed they had a leak. They called the company. That company was Kickham Boiler and Engineering. And they came out and made a R stamp weld and patch on the pressure vessel in 2012. And for reference, once again, this happened in 2017. So in 2012, they made that repair, and they took a piece of steel and they bent it themselves, it seems like. They did not replace the full dish where the factory weld would have been. they cut out 3/4 of the bottom curve of the dish of the tank. When I say dish, it's the curved end of the tank. So if you have a pressure vessel that is going to be pressurized, you have to have curved ends so that the curved ends can withstand the pressure. Otherwise, you have to make like the heads like super thick steel and add stay rods like you would on like a fire tube boiler. So like that's why on a deaerator the ends are curved, because a deaerator is pressurized, but on a feed water tank is not pressurized, so you can make flat ends to the tank. But anyways, they cut out like 3/4 of the bottom and welded in a new plate. That new plate was a 1/4 inch thick steel, and the tank was supposed to be, when it was originally built, 1/4 inch thick steel. And that was done in 2012. Everything was good then, and then they found a leak in 2017. It started leaking again, and they called it in on a Friday. A boiler company couldn't get there till Monday. And then on Monday morning, when they did a steam startup, the boiler operator was starting up the system. And at this point, the boiler company hadn't been there yet to see the leak and to inspect the pressure vessel. So the boiler operator is starting up the system because they have to make product, which in this case is corrugated boxes. And during that startup sequence, they were making steam, and it's undetermined if there was a pressure event, but there was security cam footage that showed the outside roof of the box company, and the plume off the SCR was more of a like geyser of steam. So if you're unaware, deaerator vent plume should be like a wisp of steam. It should be like a short cloud 3 to 5 feet high and just kind of roll out of the pipe. If it is pressurized and blown out of the pipe and 10 feet high, you are running too much steam through your deaerator. Now this SCR, it was a high pressure SCR. They said it ran at like 100 psi. So that's going to be more than your typical deaerator. And once again, I don't know if a SCR is just a fancy name for a high pressure deaerator or if there's a difference. I am not all knowing. I know, shocking. But I'll be the first to admit I don't know everything. And if I do say something wrong on this podcast, feel free to call me out, clip me, and say I suck and I have no credibility. Please do that. I'm happy to learn, happy to get called out. DM me, email me, and I will be the first to admit I don't know. So back to the pressure vessel. They welded in the patch, and that was supposedly 1/4 inch, but when they started up the steam system on that Monday morning, the pressure vessel failed. The bottom of the pressure vessel ruptured, which caused a boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion. So when you have water that is stored above the boiling point and then pressurized, if you lower the pressure rapidly, especially to atmospheric pressure, like that would happen when you take a tank of water that is 300 degrees and at 100 psi, if you were to just make that tank disappear, that water would instantly flash to steam because you now reduce that pressure. The only thing that's keeping that 300 degree water in the liquid form is the pressure of 100 psi in the tank. So when the bottom ruptured, all that water basically becomes steam, killed the boiler operator, hopefully immediately, but killed the boiler operator, and the tank then shot out of the boiler room like a rocket and went like 500 feet and went through the roof of another building and landed in a linen facility and killed 2 people and eventually killed a third person who didn't die on scene, but they died in the hospital. So overall, 4 people died in this event, this accident, which is tragic. Anytime somebody dies due to an industrial accident, that is the worst. Nobody should have to go to work fearing that they won't come home. And the worst part about it is that the 3 people at the linen facility, one of them was helping the 2 people. The 2 people that died were husband and wife, recently married, and they were, I think it was their first day on the job, and they were like doing their like first day job stuff, filling out papers. So you're going to your first day on your job as your husband and wife, recently married, and boom, dead from a hazard that you didn't even know existed from a company that you didn't even work for. And then the third person who died was the person helping them start their first day orientation. Tragic. And hopefully we learn from this. Otherwise, we'll just repeat it, and that is no good. So the company replaced like 3/4 of the bottom patch, and when they went to look at the pressure vessel, so they pulled it out of the roof, and they went to look at the pressure vessel, the bottom of it, they found that the metal that was around the patch was much thinner than the weld patch that the company had previously put in 2012. And that company, Kickham Boiler and Engineering, had actually closed in 2016. The company had closed in 2016, so I don't know what company they had called to come look at the pressure vessel leaking on that Friday when they had called. The boiler company couldn't get out there till Monday. So I don't know what company that was, but it was not the original company that did the original repair. And now, like, you would think, like, oh, well, they made the repair in 2012 and this happened in 2017. Why are they being brought up? So that original repair, there was multiple issues with it, and I won't get into all the details. The Chemical Safety and Hazard Board, the United States, this is federal, CSB, they put together a very good investigation report that is 95 pages that you can find. Actually, I made a blog post on boilerin.com. So if you just go to boilerin.com and articles, I put the video that they made. They have like a 16-minute video. I put that there. And if you click on the title of the blog post, you'll go, there's a short blog, and then at the bottom there's a link to the website where you can download this full report, or you can search for it, U.S. Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board, pressure vessel explosion at Loy Lange Box Company. You'll find it. You'll find the video on YouTube, or you can go to boilerin.com, go to articles at the top, and the blog post is titled Complacency Kills Loy Lange Box Company Tragedy. You'll find it. So anyways, when they looked at the bottom metal, the metal from the repair patch was much thicker than the metal that it was welded to, that was the original steel from the construction of the pressure vessel. And the Kickham boiler employees that they interviewed said that the metal was the same. So if the metal was the same on when they welded in the patch, both pieces of steel, the repair and the original steel around it, would have been around the same thickness, but the original steel that they welded the repair to was much thinner than the repair patch. So both would have corroded at the same rate. So there was, recommendations and shortcomings there when the repair patch was put in. It obviously held. It didn't fail immediately, so it obviously held. So the company never thought they did anything wrong, at least publicly. Maybe the welder putting the patch in was like, shoot, we don't have enough steel to do the whole patch. It was done under like an emergency repair. And then Kickham Boiler and Engineering eventually recommended that the pressure vessel be inspected and fully repaired and the full dish be done. But Loy Lange Box Company never did that. So that's essentially how the pressure vessel failed, is the bottom corroded. So the pressure vessel was steel, and when you have water has oxygen in it, and it will pit the steel and corrode the steel. And that is the point of a deaerator, or in this case, a SCR, and that removes oxygen from the water, and then you also add chemicals to it. But it sounded like from the report that they were shutting down every weekend. So if you shut down every weekend, now you are introducing water or oxygen back into your water as your water cools. And when you do that every single weekend, it's going to corrode the bottom of the tank, especially when you don't have good chemical treatment. Another part to blame was they looked at the chemical treatment records, and about over 50% of the records showed they were low on sulfite. Sulfite is an oxygen scavenger, helps to prevent corrosion of steel. So if you have a normal sulfite pump and it's pumping in sulfite on an automatic schedule, that may be fine when you are running the boiler in a normal state, but when you do startup, you bring in a ton of makeup water super quick, and you need to spike your chemical in order to treat all that makeup water. Most companies do not do that. It didn't sound like they were doing it in this case. Now, when the problem with taking a test of water treatment is it's only a snapshot. So when you're testing the water, it is a snapshot in time. So you could test it and the water could be acceptable, I guess. And then an hour later, it could become unacceptable. So if you only test it once a day, in that very moment, it's a snapshot, and you have the whole rest of the day, and the water could get off, and then it could come back in within range. But it sounded like they were testing it irregularly and only doing it maybe on a weekly basis, and then the water treatment company would come in quarterly along with Clayton. There's more details in that in the investigation report. Once again, highly recommend you read this. I'm just kind of paraphrasing it and then giving my takes. But there was lacking on the water treatment. Another problem was The city of St. Louis, let's start with Missouri. Missouri didn't require inspections on pressure vessels, and the city of St. Louis didn't require it either and was understaffed with the boiler inspections and mechanical inspections. And they prioritized other equipment, and the Clayton steam generators were never inspected after the year 2000. And when the SCR was installed in, I believe, 99 or 2000, a permit was never pulled for it or was never recorded. So the city of St. Louis never even had records that the pressure vessel was there. But, if they would have been doing regular boiler inspections every year, then they would have seen the pressure vessel and been able to say, like, oh, that's not a registered pressure vessel. So, we need to get this within compliance. And then FM Global, which was the insurance company, said that they weren't required to inspect the pressure vessels and boilers, so they never did inspections. So it was kind of like this triangle of nobody wants to take blame and everybody just says, well, we weren't required to do this. And ultimately, it falls back on the owner of the steam system, which is Loy Lange Box Company. But they were hiring an outside water treatment company. They were hiring Clayton, which was the boiler manufacturer, to come in on a quarterly basis. So, like, the leadership of the box company or the manager, whoever is making that decision, doesn't know anything about steam and boilers and process. And they are looking at these contractors to tell them what is wrong, what is right, and to make decisions. And if the contractor doesn't do everything by the book and communicate perfectly with the customer representative, then you can have a lot of shortcomings. So if a contractor, just think about, when they say, oh, Clayton was coming out on a quarterly basis. So that's a service technician, comes out quarterly, maybe checks combustion, checks all the safety controls. They have their routine. He's not essentially coming out and thinking like, oh, like I need to make sure that they're fully in compliance of everything. They're just kind of more coming out with, oh, let me see if I can spot anything that I notice is wrong. Let me see if I could spot anything that, we could quote them for parts. Let me see if I can, spot some general issues. They're not going to be going over the system with a fine-tooth comb every single quarter. And when you don't have a boiler inspector coming out at least annually to look at the condition of the boilers, in this case steam generator, and pressure vessels, then it just kind of falls through the cracks. And while Kickham Boiler and Engineering did recommend that the pressure vessel be replaced on the bottom, and Clayton did recommend that, a recommendation I have found in my experience normally falls on deaf ears. Normally, managers will see a recommendation and that is optional. Like, oh, well, we're running and everything is fine now. You're recommending that. It's kind of like when you go to the dealership and you get an oil change and they do a 70-point inspection that they advertise that's free with your oil change, and they say, hey, like, we recommend this stuff, your tires, we measured the tread, it's in yellow. Yellow means like you don't have to be replaced, but we recommend you replace it soon. And your brake pads are like thin and they're yellow, like it's not, and like it's all this, oh, well, we recommend this maintenance stuff, but it's not like dire circumstances of like, you cannot drive out of here. And most people see that as, oh, yeah, of course, the dealership is selling me more stuff. Obviously, they're going to recommend that my tires be replaced and my brake pads be replaced. Like, that's more money for them. Like, yes, at a certain point, a dealership is telling you the truth. Like, yes, your tires will need to be replaced eventually and your brake pads will need to be replaced eventually. But most dealerships will recommend that be done before it's really necessary. And that will vary across all dealerships. And that'll be the same thing with mechanical companies and boiler companies. A recommendation of, hey, this should be done is much different than this has to be done. And when a company says, hey, this should be done, a manager says yes or no. But when a boiler inspector comes out and says, hey, this has to be done, and I'm putting a red tag on your equipment, now all of a sudden the blank checks can come out and say, all right, we're going to get it done because we can't run. Like, this is a issue that the boiler inspector has noted. Or if your insurance company comes out and says, hey, this has to be done, otherwise we're dropping your insurance, that's much different than a contractor coming out and saying, oh, we recommend this. And that just goes to more communication. I don't know what the proper communication is to a manager to get them between should and have to. If a manager doesn't have the budget or doesn't understand that the should is all capital letters and the importance of your recommendation, I don't know who that falls on. Yeah, you made that recommendation, but you didn't force them. Like, there's all kinds of points in history and time where people have recommended stuff and then stuff happens, but they're still blamed because they didn't make it as important and they didn't communicate how important it was to the person. And essentially the courts said that a recommendation is not enough, does not put enough importance on whatever happened or the whatever you were proposing. And it goes into all this communication stuff, which I would say contractors don't communication is probably the number one weakness in the trades. You can have amazing service techs, you can have amazing salespeople, but if you don't communicate with your customer, your customer's probably going to feel shorted no matter what you do. So that's kind of what was going on. The CSB has a lot of great pictures and procedures and recommendations. They were looking at the Loy Lange Box Company and they were asking, hey, where are your startup procedures? And the company said, oh, they were destroyed in the accident. And they also said that the boiler logbook was destroyed in the accident. Both could be true, and I noted this in my blog post, but both could be true, but the CSB interviewed the other boiler operators. There were 3 of them. So one died, so he obviously couldn't be interviewed. But the other 2 operators said that this one operator was the guy who did the startups, and the other 2 generally did more maintenance tasks and weren't in the boiler room as much. So what that sounds like to me is the one operator knew everything and knew how to do everything, and all the procedures were in his head, and he kind of kept the ship on course. And the other 2 operators, while they had a state license to be a boiler operator, weren't fully in tune with what was happening in the boiler room and what had to happen. just because you can pass a test doesn't mean you walk in a boiler room and just instantly know what's going on and know the best way of how to do everything. Every steam system is going to be different, and especially with Clayton steam generators, it's a little different than your standard boiler. And especially if you have to do a startup of a system every single week, that takes turning valves and managing water and a lot of stuff that ends up not being in a startup procedure or a normal operation procedure. So that sounds like the procedure was in his head and he was the guy, the key man. And when the key man doesn't want to make waves and sees the tank of the pressure vessel leaking, he says, oh, that's fine, because the pressure vessel had leaked, I think, 4 times previous to that incident in 2017. So like 2012, and then it had leaked previously before that. So he is now saying like, oh, that's fine. And he's essentially grown complacent to what is normal. So normal becomes, at that point in time, oh, the pressure vessel is leaking and dripping. We just have to call in a boiler company, but we need to keep running, because if you have ever worked in a production facility, you'll know that production is king. And when you only have one of something, if that one thing is shut down, then you can't run, there's no production, and now people in management start coming out of everywhere asking questions. Like, there's more than just a boiler operator saying, yep, this is unsafe, let's shut this down. Like, if he feels like his job will be threatened and whatnot, I know they have the responsibility to safely operate a boiler room, but there's so much that goes into it. If management pressures production above everything and doesn't have a good safety culture and, listening to workers, like, that bleeds into everything. And you can say what you want on paper and, boiler operators are supposed to do this, supposed to do that, but they're going to follow the way that management goes. So essentially, I kind of got off track. Forget where I was going. But the Loy Lange Box Company didn't have any procedures, and it sounded like they had little to no training. They got people that went out and got a boiler operator license, which was required by the city of St. Louis, and then that was it. And when you have a steam system, you need to have some training procedures that are specific for your system. You can have the manufacturer's manual, which is fine, but it's just a general manual. And that's why I talk about, I don't think I've talked about it on the podcast, but I talk about with like customers and, anybody, that it's so important to have customized training for your facility, especially if you're a production facility, and especially if you have multiple shifts. Like, customized training and procedures makes the world of a difference. And it takes tribal knowledge that one person that's maybe been there for 20 years, they know everything, and then you're now trying to train up other people, and there's going to be gaps. Get that all down on paper, get that all written out, test it. Hey, can somebody follow this? And a lot of times, a good instruction procedure can take the place of training. Training doesn't solve everything. There's other ways to solve problems than training, and a good instruction procedure can solve that. Like, if you find people, oh, well, we're not starting up the steam system correctly, they keep messing it up. Oh, when this person doesn't start it up, this happens. So we always got to make sure that this person starts up the system. Most times people would say, oh, well, we just need to train these other people more. Like, we need to send them more training classes. We need to hire a trainer and bring them in. Like, yes, they do need training, but training isn't the sole focus that should be. Like, it's not, oh, like we need to talk about more PowerPoints and more Steam procedures and all this stuff. The number one focus of a good trainer would be to come in and then see that the people are struggling because they don't have a good procedure to follow. And if there can be a procedure made, that procedure will supersede training, and people will be able to follow a procedure and follow it the same as long as it's written correctly, much better than if you try to tell them and train them. And now that leads to a lot of ambiguity of, wait, I thought it was this and my notes say this, but you think it's this. And then you start playing telephone a little bit too of, well, so and so told me to do it this way, but you're saying it to do it this way, but I think it should be this way. And it leads to confusion. And then all of a sudden, your trained people still aren't doing it correctly. And that's why a procedure is so important. But it takes some time and somebody to know what they're looking at and how to do it, to write the procedure, to take the pictures, to label. Like it takes some thought. It's not just we need a procedure and one day it's done. But I would highly recommend that. But just overall, we're coming up a little over 50 minutes. I don't want to go through this whole 95 pages, but I've given my number one thing is complacency. Complacency kills. If leaks on a boiler become normal, like, we only have a tube leak, it's only a small leak, just keep running, the water will evaporate, or, as long as it doesn't start filling up in the burner, we're good. Or, it's only a little leak. Like, that's pushing the boundaries of what is safe, and you are just slowly pushing the line, and you're losing your calibration of what should be normal. And then normal, all of a sudden, after many, many employees and lots of tribal knowledge, 10 years later, you are wildly out in left field of what is normal if you don't have procedures and guides that are written by the company that people stick to of, hey, when this happens, we do this. When this happens, we do this. And, if the box company said, hey, if this pressure vessel, if we see a leak, it's at 100 PSI. If you see a leak, shut down immediately. Like, unsafe to run. Like, that should have been the procedure, but it had become normal. Like, it's just a little leak, like it'll be fine, because it's been fine before that. And that's how you get into these accidents where in the investigation after, you can put all these blocks together and be like, well, how do they not see this coming? Well, it's because people lose their calibration of what is normal. And it's the same. A good, easy way to think about this is with heights. If you're working around heights, day one, you are little uneasy, you're scared, you're wearing your harness, you're always clipped in, double clip in. A week goes past, you're getting normal, you're getting a little bit more comfortable. A month goes past, you make your fall harness a little bit looser because it's more comfortable that way. You may not clip in, in all areas that you need to. And, you may get closer to an edge than you have to. And then, a year goes by and now you're comfortable at heights and you wear your harness loose so that, it doesn't hurt you and rub on your legs and your back. And you only clip in once and you lead your second lead always clipped to your harness so you don't have 100% tie off. Because, you haven't fallen yet, so it's fine. You just transfer the one lead to the next clip point, and you'll be fine. And then 10 years later, now you're running around on beams at heights and catwalks like a pro, and then all of a sudden you fall. And you slip out of your harness because you don't have it clipped across your chest, and you get injured or die. And that comes from complacency and getting used to the dangers around you. And that's why I don't have the statistic in front of me, but it's like people who work on a job for 12 years are more likely to get hurt than somebody working like new on the job, because somebody new on the job is very respectful of all the danger and not used to it, and they're very like scared, I guess, of everything around them because it's not normal, and they're like taking in all these procedures and trying to do everything correctly. Whereas somebody who, if you haven't gotten hurt for 12 years, you start thinking that you are above safety procedures and that happens to other people and that doesn't happen to you. And all of a sudden it happens to you. And you lost your calibration with what is normal, and nobody reminded you of it or checked you, and you didn't check yourself. And that's how accidents happen that are very preventable. Another thing I want to touch on before we wrap up on this is the safety valve. They did find the safety valve of this tank, and I said, so the MAWP of the tank was 150, and the safety valve that was installed on the tank was 200 psi. So you can't have a safety valve that has a pressure setting 50 psi over the maximum allowable working pressure of the tank. And I can almost guarantee you this is how this happened. So if you are running at 100, 110 psi, and on a corrugation line, the load will vary. They will speed up. You'll have a sudden steam demand, and all of a sudden, a roll of paper will rip or something. Something will go down, and now there's no instant demand. So the boiler is going to be ramping, and you may have a pressure spike. And over a long enough time period, you will eventually keep spiking your pressure in your SCR. And, if you're only 40, if your normal operation pressure is only 40 psi, it doesn't take much to get things out of whack, to have steam traps leak through, that you are coming up on 150 psi. Maybe that relief valve was leaking, or it would intermittently pop, and that was happening a little too much. And then somebody says, you know what we're going to do? We're going to increase that by 50 psi to get it further away from our operating pressure to avoid these intermittent pops that are not the relief valve actually like protecting the pressure vessel. It is just upset situations that end up popping the relief valve. And I can almost guarantee that's how that happened, because nobody just changes the relief valve and says, oh, you know what, we need to change the relief valve. Let me just get a different pressure. Like, somebody probably made the conscious decision of, oh, I'll get 50 more psi, and that will allow us to keep the relief valve from intermittently popping when the corrugator goes down and the pressure spikes in the SCR. It's either that or they ordered a new relief valve and they didn't pay attention to the pressure. But that's why I harp on, if you go into a boiler room, if you're an operator, if you're a service tech, check the relief valve tags against the data tags on your pressure vessels, on your boilers. Just because the relief valve is installed and has been installed for years doesn't make it correct. You should always go in with the assumption that there is a problem and that your employer or that your customer is testing you and you should find that problem. Trust but verify. You want to go in there and be like, all right, the customer is running correctly. I know everything's fine, but I'm going to verify that everything's fine. And then you go through everything. You go through all the safety controls. You check, yep, everything's working. Everything's wired correctly. You go through all the valves. Yep, all the valves are in the proper position. They're doing all the blowdowns properly. The feed water's in the feed water tank is working fine. The DA is fine. The plume is fine on the DA. The DA pressure is fine. And then you go, oh, what are my safety relief valves doing? What are my safety valves on my steam generators in this case? All right, steam generators are stamped at 150 psi. What is the safety valve on the steam generator? All right, we're at 150 psi. All right, that's good. Check the capacity of the safety valve. Yep, all right. The total capacity of all the safety valves added together is more than the rated capacity of the steam generator. All right, we're good. Now check my pressure vessel. Pressure vessel is rated at 150, safety valve's 200. Oh, red flag. Instant shutdown, wrong safety valve. Like, that's what you should be going through. Like, because it's kind of weird and it's kind of awkward if you have a customer that doesn't do anything in their boiler room and they hire, maybe your company has been there for 15 years and done everything in the boiler room, and somebody makes a mistake, and 10 years that mistake is not noticed, and then all of a sudden you go in and say, hey, this is wrong. The customer then says, like, well, your company installed that and put that in. Like, why would you do that if that's wrong? And that can lead to an awkward conversation. You can avoid that by being very observant and not assuming everything is correct, and not assuming that the people before you did things correctly. You make mistakes, other people make mistakes, and it's better when everybody checks and watches each other's backs than blindly trusting that everything is correct and they just need to get through the day and that accidents happen to other people. Once again, go to boilearn.com, click on articles. I have the video that the CSB put together on that article. Make sure you click on the title of the article. The video shows, and if you just click on the video will start playing, but click on the title of the article will pop up. You can still watch the video. I think it's 16 minutes. It's very, very well done. Go to the bottom. There's a link to the CSB's website for the final report. Download the report, share it with other people, read it, bring it to a service meeting, discuss it. There's so much to learn, and there's so much more that I didn't go over. But there was a lawsuit, obviously, especially when people die. But when something happens like this, the lawyers are going to come out. There was a lawsuit. The total settlement was $47 million. And the defendants, this is how they broke it down. Kickham Boiler and Engineering, $728,000. Now at this point, and I don't know what happened, but Kickham Boiler and Engineering had closed in 2016, according to the CSB report. So I'm not sure how you find a company that has closed, but $728,000 to a local service company, like that's a lot of cash, and that can easily put a company under. So think about that the next time you want to just mail it in on a Friday afternoon and not do your safety checks on a boiler. Like, if you kill somebody, you could easily put your company out of business, put 30 people out of a job. Like, that's why boiler safety and doing things by the book, like, it's so important. Anyways, Chicago Boiler Company, $2 million. Chicago Boiler Company is the company that built the SCR for Clayton. Aqua Comp Water Treatment Services, $2 million. That was the water treatment company that came in quarterly that I guess was not keeping up with the chemicals. And I mean, I know what the quarterly visits entail. You come in, you check everything, you look at past reports, you make recommendations. But I mean, the water treatment company can't force the boiler operators, or Loy Lange Box Company, to add more chemicals or to check the water more often. Like, you're kind of tied unless the company wants you to be there more often. So that's interesting. Loy Lange Box Company, $4 million. Arise Incorporated, which was the insurance company, $17,500,000. And then Clayton Industries, which was the steam generator company, $21 million. And I mean, this is, that's a $21 million to Clayton. I don't know how large Clayton is. I mean, they're still around, so they survived this. I'm sure they have insurance for this. So I'm sure they didn't write a $21 million check. They normally, companies, especially a boiler company, is going to have insurance. So if lawsuits are brought against the company, the insurance company pays out for that lawsuit settlement. But $21 million, like, that's not like, oh yeah, like, let me just pull out my wallet. Like, $21 million, like, that's a lot of money to be responsible for a customer that bought your steam generators and you had a quarterly PM service with. Like, there's, it wasn't like Clayton built a tank that failed 2 months after the tank was installed. Like, there was multiple parties involved in this poor decision making over years and years and years, and to be blamed with $21 million, like, that's a lot. Now, I don't know what happened in the court case and all the evidence, but to me that seems like a lot of money. It also seems like the most money was awarded to the company that could afford it. Like, Kickham Boiler and Engineering, if you paid or told them to pay out $21 million, that company doesn't have it. Water Treatment Services Company, that company doesn't have it. So, I mean, that's kind of interesting. Loy Lange, I don't know how big the company is, but I mean, $21 million to a box company, that would put a dent in their P&L. So I don't know, but lawsuits are a whole different animal when the lawyers start getting involved. And it just boils down to, just because something hasn't happened doesn't mean it won't. And you need to protect yourself no matter what your customer says. If your customer says, oh, it's fine, we'll run, like, write up your recommendation, but we're like, do we really have to shut down? Like, and then you go like, oh, like, maybe the customer is your buddy, and you don't want him looking bad for his boss, and you're like, yeah, well, you really should shut down, like, it's really not right, but you know what? It'll be fine for a couple more days. And then all of a sudden, a couple more days turns into 3 months later. Nothing's done. Like, you just got to be careful. And that also goes into training. If you're an outside contractor, it is so important to be on the same page of what is acceptable, because your people can easily bring on more risk to your company than you know about just by casual conversation. Like, I've had casual conversations with people, and then they'll call my boss after I leave, and they'll be like, well, your person said this. I'm like, well, I said that casually. Like, that wasn't my official recommendation. Like, I said, like, oh, well, if you did this, like, this could be the case. Well, if you did this would be the case. But in my experience, this. But, they take in my experience, they take that as concrete truth. And a lot of people can hear something wrong even if you say it correctly. They'll pull out all the words that they understand. They'll put those words together and they can have a totally different meaning. And that miscommunication is so easy to have. I've had it all the time. And that's why writing down clear reports on a piece of paper is so important, because you can understand exactly what's happened and it's written down and the recommendations are written down and nothing's left up for verbal miscommunication. So anyways, I've ranted long enough. I've stumbled over my words long enough. If you got this far, bless you. Please rate the podcast 5 stars. That would be very helpful. If you have a podcast topic recommendation or want to come on the podcast as a guest or have a guest recommendation, email me, eric.johnson@boilearn.com, eric.johnson@boilearn.com, or DM me on LinkedIn. If you're on LinkedIn and we're not connected, hit me a follow or in connection request. I love LinkedIn. It's the number one business tool for me, at least. Get on LinkedIn, get serious, love boilers, and stay wild.